Welcome to today's technical webinar organized by the Global Action Partnership for EPR. Today's webinar will focus on data needs and monitoring. Before we start, a couple of housekeeping rules. Next slide, please, Daniel. Please mute yourself during the inputs. Please be aware that the meeting is being recorded, and by participating, you consent to the recording. Follow the chat for any updates and use it to post your questions. You can post your questions already during the inputs, and they will be taken up at the end of the meeting. During the discussion part, you can also react by using the raised hand feature. And if you're speaking, please indicate your name and organization when posting a question in the chat or speaking. At this point, a quick disclaimer: the views and opinions of the experts expressed in this webinar do not reflect the positions of all core partners of the GAP for EPR, nor the Prevent Waste Alliance members or official policy positions of the international organizations and governments involved. Before we start, this is a GAP for EPR event, so let me quickly introduce you the new Global Action Partnership we have. Thanks, Daniel. So GRZ, WWF, and OECD have partnered to establish the Global Action Partnership for Extended Producers Responsibility, short GAP for EPR, hosted by the Prevent Waste Alliance. And the partnership also receives circular economy support from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and is in close collaboration with United Nations Environmental Programme on providing technical support to governments and PROs. The GAP for EPR has 3 pillars, which are all accessible on our website. The first pillar is our library. Here you will find main documents on EPR, like our EPR Toolbox, which is a comprehensive guide on what EPR is and how it can be implemented. Secondly, we have started an EPR help desk, which supports your EPR journey with a pool of global experts. And here I would like to invite you that if you have any questions, any specific questions regarding EPR or your EPR journey, then simply send us a request and we will match it with an expert who can provide the guidance you require. And also for most of the stakeholders from low and middle income countries, the help desk is generally free of charge. Then thirdly, we have a community pillar where we provide peer-to-peer learning. You can connect with EPR practitioners, and we also give the room to learn from each other. It is also a platform to discuss critically on EPR and to innovate EPR as a model. The GAP for EPR was launched in October, and during this launch event, we received many technical questions we would like to answer in the technical webinars with the support of our EPR experts. So in order to do so, we have organized 3 webinars. One already took place last week on common EPR setups and architectures last week on the 5th of December. You can already find the recording of this webinar on our website and on our YouTube channel. Today, we talk about data needs and monitoring. And next week on December the 20th, we have, just before Christmas, a very interesting session on cost, fees, and eco-modulation. And again, also today's recording and next week's recording will be uploaded on our Prevent Waste website and our YouTube channel. So let me come to today's expert. Today we have the pleasure to have Daniel and Andreas with us. Daniel Hinchcliffe and Andreas Manhart are both senior researchers at the ECHO Institute, which is one of Europe's leading independent research and consultancy non-profit organizations, and also focuses on circular economy and waste management, providing technical and financial support in the international waste sector and contributing to environmental policy development. Please also note that we have other experts from Cyclos in this meeting who are available to support too. So a warm welcome to all of you, and hand over to Daniel.
Yes, thanks very much for the kind introduction, Christopher. And yeah, I have the pleasure to present to you today our ideas and information around data needs and monitoring. So just to give you an overview of what I want to go through in this presentation, firstly, we want to give a bit of a recap on producer responsibility organizations, so PROs in EPR systems and how this works. These are very important actors when it comes to the data collection, administration, and monitoring, and that's why we wanted to kind of go into that again. So the second part will be going much more in depth on the needs relating to data and monitoring. And then finally, we have some questions which were put to us on the global launch event for the EPR Global Pact. And we'll go through some of these questions in the third part before we go into the discussion with everybody in the call. So firstly, just a quick recap, the role of PROs in an EPR system. Extended producer responsibility essentially means that we apply the polluter pays principle, in which producers and importers are responsible for collection and recycling of the packaging that they bring on the market. So in an EPR system, we see here on the left-hand side, producers and importers bring packaging onto the market. This then ends up with the consumer after they buy products. And when they dispose of it, it goes to waste management operators and disposal, collection, recycling. And in an extended producer responsibility system, normally the most easy way to set this up is that each of the producers pays a contribution to a producer responsibility organization, a PRO, who organizes the collection and recycling on their behalf. And this happens then for many different producers. So it's collectively organized. We don't have to get the exact same packaging back from the producer who brought it onto the market, but actually we can get equivalent amounts from different producers. So this fee is paid to the producer responsibility organization, who determines the fee based on the costs for running the system for collection and recycling. And this essentially enables us to finance waste management through extended producer responsibility. So that's the idea behind EPR. And the role that the PRO has in an EPR system is very important. So they are responsible normally for registering obliged companies and their product and waste volumes brought onto the market. They collect and administer funds. They tender and contract waste collection and management services, and they monitor that these are being carried out effectively. They document waste collection and management, and they provide proof of this documentation from the producers and importers on the compliance with their EPR obligations. And they may also have a major role to play in information campaigns for consumers on how they should separate their waste at source. And depending on where you are and how the system is being set up, we also have different types of PROs. So it's just important to be aware of this. Some countries have set up a system where they have one non-profit company who has a monopoly on the market. They manage the whole system. In this sense, you have no competition between different PROs. And this makes it slightly easier to get an overview of all the different companies that are obliged and whether they've been captured by PROs in the market. It's easier to transparently monitor and trace this, but maybe it's not the most effective in terms of economics because there's no competition. And the opposite, or not the opposite, but the alternative that we have is countries where there's a for-profit company, PRO, in competition with other PROs. And you might, for instance, have 10 different PROs in a country competing with each other to get customers, clients to be responsible for the different producers and importers. And this means that they then reduce their costs, become more economically efficient. But at the same time, you then lose some of the transparency that you have in your system in terms of the financing, the funds that are available to manage the system. So these are the two different kinds of PROs. And of course, which one you have influences a little bit the monitoring in the system. But this is just something to be aware of before we now go into the data needs. So secondly, we now can jump into the data needs and monitoring part of this presentation. And I've tried to outline the three kind of key areas where we want to get data. So the first one, it's really important that we know who our obliged parties are, and we get these registered with authorities so that we can actually set up the EPR system. We know who's paying in and obliged. Secondly, the data needs that we have, and the data we collect really depends on what objectives and requirements we set in the EPR system that we want to meet. So this tends to be the volumes put on the market and the volumes collected and recycled in the system. And thirdly, in your EPR legislative framework, you may have additional goals where you say PROs are also responsible for source segregation and collection. And here, one of the key indicators is the number of households served for this example. And at each of these interfaces where we have data flows or material flows between different actors, we need to have monitoring in place to make sure that all of those flows of data or material are actually verified and correct. So looking firstly at obliged parties, here we're talking about any company that introduces packaging or packaged goods for consumption to a national market. And this product will also be discarded in the same national market. National market. This is what we're referring to when we talk about obliged parties. And we really need to have an overview of all of those actors to make this EPR system functional. So we need to define exactly who they are. And maybe there are other exemptions possible for companies that maybe don't bring so much packaging onto the market. We can think about flat fees for them, just to simplify it for smaller enterprises. Secondly, we can look at all the business registration documents, taxation, customs data that we have at a state level with authorities to try and make sure that we captured everybody who's actually an obliged party on the system. And the data that we then would want to collect depends very much on the objectives of the EPR system and the requirements that we set to the obliged parties. So we take an example here in which we've set objectives of the EPR system to manage packaging waste in an environmentally sound manner. We reduce littering and disposal, and we increase the high quality recycling. That's the overall objective. And to meet that objective, we set requirements for obliged parties. So obliged parties should ensure that the packaging used for their products is collected and managed in an environmentally sound manner. And in this case, we also set source segregation targets that on a household level, 40% of households will be attached to separate collection systems. And the first step to then moving this forward really depends on having good definitions of what is in scope of these targets. So here we can put industry packaging out of scope, and service packaging, you're targeting different obliged parties. So we also take that out of scope for this presentation. And we look at household packaging, and this is then differentiated into different subcategories. So we have beverage containers, plastic packaging, and other packaging. Some of this is single use, but you also have reusable bottles, for instance. And it's really important that we define these subcategories well and understand which products we want to tackle in our EPR system, because this is then what we track in terms of the data of what's being put on the market and then being recycled at a later date. So we may want to then set targets. So to make this EPR system go somewhere, we have to have a target of different amounts of different packaging to be collected and recycled. So in this case, let's say you are starting from a very low, or you're starting an EPR system for the first time. We might want to say in the first phase, for year 1 and 2, we have a separate collection of about 10% in all households. And we will set for this initial phase a target of 50% of composite and flexible materials will be collected for waste management. In a second phase, we then extend this to 30% of collection, so years 3 and 4. And then we extend this to all single-use plastics. And we set there the percentage at 50%. So this is just an example of how this could be done in a phased approach to steadily over time increase your targets of what you want to collect. And then in phase 3, we could again increase these targets for years 5 and onwards once we get used to how the EPR system works and is operating. So we're basically saying we want to track the following targets: 50% of composite materials and flexible packaging, and 50% of single-use household packaging at a later date with the second phase. And here it's really important that we look at these targets as company specific. We don't set them on a national level. It needs to be company specific because each company knows exactly what they're putting onto the market. And that's where we then can figure out how much are they obliged to pay in. So each company must ensure that it collects and manages a volume of at least 50% of what is brought onto the market by themselves. And this does not necessarily need to be identical packaging to what they bring on the market. It can be an equivalent amount. So if we take an example here, we go with snacking or snack king, depending on how you say it. And let's say we have this company, Snack King, they bring 50 tons of composite material every year onto the market, and they bring 150 tons of PET bottles onto the market. They are obliged in this EPR system that we've discussed to collect 25 tons of composite material per year and 75 tons of PET bottles per year. So they must report the volumes they bring on the market to a PRO and the authorities, and the PRO must provide data that these obligations are fulfilled on recycling and collection to the authorities. And we see here that actually this is the basis for setting up an EPR system. So all producers actually know the amount of packaging they're putting on the market. All the recyclers know how much that they are recycling on the market. So well-designed EPR systems actually set up the databases for a functioning system in that they obligate the different operators in the system to report this data. And then we get this overview of the data that is available in the system after the EPR system has been started. So we really don't need to have this data before we start the EPR system. The EPR system actually generates the data itself. And using this data, we can also then extrapolate to a national or state level. But even just having these volumes put on the market and volumes collected and recycled is enough to make the EPR system work. We can also look at the market share based on the volumes brought on the market as well, if we want to look at individual different responsibilities for producers. So just to give you an example and proof that every producer that brings the packaging onto the market knows what's on the market, here's the global sustainability report from Coca-Cola. And we can see in all these years, they know exactly how much packaging they're putting onto the global market, and 5.95 million tons of packaging is going on the market in 2022. They know the different types of packaging, so the subcategories of packaging that goes on the market, and they also know to a certain extent what's being recycled and collected. So here it's a very clear indication that each producer will know exactly what they're putting on the market because that's their business. And of course, this is a global level, but in each country, we also have this data. And then at the recycler side, we also have a daily routine for recycler where you're recording the weight of each delivery of material to be recycled. And then you also look at the specifications. What's the quality of the waste that's coming in? And what type of waste is it? Can I even recycle this? So recyclers also have this data, and the data system for an EPR basically depends on collecting this data and then being able to see if this meets your targets. So we take an example of how to build a data system. We have 3 obliged parties. They bring packaging onto the market, and this goes to consumers. This is the packaging flow. And each of them has to then submit data on the annual packaging volume for each of the defined categories of packaging to the PRO. PRO's job is then to aggregate that data and give that to the authorities according to the defined categories. The PRO is responsible as well for collection and recycling. So they make contracts, this is the dotted line, with recyclers and collectors and aggregators. And the packaging flows from the consumers to the collectors and then onto the recyclers. The recyclers then look at the data that they received on the recycling packaging and collect the packaging, and they send this data to the PRO, who again aggregates the data and gives it onto the authorities. And in terms of monitoring, the authorities can then verify this data through other waste legislation. They'll be checking what the recyclers are doing through a compliance verification. So this is a basic system of how you can organize data flows within an EPR. And you can see this works quite nicely around the key indicators that we've just discussed. So the interim conclusion on this is that EPR data systems primarily require a sound definition of packaging categories. And once you have this in place, we need data on the packaging volumes brought onto the market by each obliged company. So this means they're annual data, and it also needs to be differentiated into the predefined packaging categories that you set out for your scheme. And the data on packaging waste volumes collected and recycled through the system. So this can be batch-specific data, but also annual data from recyclers. And this again needs to be differentiated into these predefined packaging categories. So it's really important to define exactly which packaging is in the system. So again, if we take another example of an EPR system, let's say the state sets goals in the first step. We want minimum collection and recycling of a target X% of packaging volumes, and obliged parties should increase separation and collection at source. And in this case, a producer responsibility organization is responsible for all packaging types. So they have these different material focuses. These are well defined into subtypes in the legislation. And it's also possible to say we want a higher X% specific target for different subcategories. So we might say we want a higher percentage of flexible composite packaging to be collected. Second step, every PRO member has to report the packaging volume brought onto the market in each category. So by tons per year, they know what was brought onto the market in the previous calendar year, and they have projections for the ongoing year. They report this data to the PRO. And based on this, if we want, we can also then calculate the market share of each of those producers or importers. And the third step, we then collect the data from the PRO contractors. So that's the recyclers and collectors, how much was collected and how much was managed through these systems according to each of our packaging categories. So here we want to finally have an input-output analysis of what was entering and what was leaving the recycler, tons. If we have it on a batch-based process, we can also look at what date was it collected, when was it received, where was it received, get other information on the source and so on. But finally, we want to know as well what happened with it. Did it go into recycling, energy recovery, or disposal? So this is the data from the recycler side. And once we have these two data inputs, how much was brought on the market by PRO members and how much was recycled and collected by PRO efforts, we can calculate the effectiveness for each of the subcategories. So we have this then for plastics, different types of plastics, cardboard, paper, glass, metal. And again, actually, we've got the repetition there at the end. Based on all of this, we then get a total effectiveness. And we can see, does this meet the target that we set in the legislation of X%? So on the aggregated level, we can then ask ourselves, like we can then make this made available to the public as high-level data. And we might have then more detailed data that we just share with PRO members and authorities. Now, if you set additional goals in the EPR system, this could be source segregation and collection as an example, then we may want to track additional data indicators. So for segregation and collection, here the decisive indicator would be maybe the number and share of households equipped with bins, for instance. And here you might then set other data to measure achievement of further goals. So promote separation and collection at source. And we want to track the achievement of this separation and collection at source. So here you would start with your collection concept. So let's say, for example, the PRO reaches agreements with different municipalities. And based on these agreements, the PRO then cares for the introduction of source segregation on a household level. They introduce bins, they raise consumer awareness, and they do a weekly pickup. So here we can then say the data that we want to collect are the number of municipalities the PRO has agreements with, the number of households serviced by the PRO, the packaging volumes collected through the system, and put this as well in proportion to other channels of collection, so we can monitor this, and the countrywide share of households serviced by the PRO. And again, looking at monitoring, what we want to monitor is the data of things entering the market and things, again, being collected and recycled. So it's important to monitor the PRO performance, which can be done by third parties. It could be an auditor, or it could be a state authority. And we need all obliged operators to be registered with a central agency. This can be done on behalf of them by the PRO. We need all of these operators to report the total weight of sales packaging that they've marketed broken down by our subcategories, by the material to the central agency. And then we need a documentation of these volume flows and recycling quotas and verify this with reports from recyclers. And what's really important here is that there's a clear sanction. If you don't participate in the EPR system, but you're an obliged operator, then it needs to be clear that there will be sanctions. So it could be that you fail to register completely, or that you fail to distribute the goods that you registered in the correct way. So for instance, in Germany, there is a 100,000 euro fine for every instance of non-compliance. And if you're not participating in any EPR system, then you may even have 200,000 euro fine, and you might be banned from marketing your goods on the market. So this is really important to make sure that your obliged parties actually take part. So that's the main part of what we're going to present today. And we have these questions that we received from the Global EPR Pact, and we'd like to just go through some of these with you as a bit of a recap as well on what's just been presented. So the first question was, does it influence the effectiveness of EPR schemes if the producer is the packaging raw material supplier, or the packaging converter, or the brand owner? And here, as we mentioned, it's really important to define who the actor is putting on the market so that you get all the obliged parties you want in the system. So again, this refers to any company that introduces packaged goods for consumption to a national market, and that this product would also be discarded in the same national market. So if we look at consumer packaging, it's those who make the decisions on packaging, what type of packaging is going to be used. It's those who fill the packaging. And this might not necessarily then be the packaging converter or the brand owner of the packaging, but it would be the person who's bringing products like maybe soft drinks onto the market and making those packaging decisions. For service packaging, it's a bit different. There, it's better to target the brand owner of the packaging, because often in service businesses, maybe kiosks or restaurants, they're just using packaging which comes from the brand owner. So there it's a bit different, but otherwise I think this is clear from this definition. We had another question which was asking about what do you do if you don't have any data collection or traceability in place? And this, I think, was coming from Nepal. Is there any existing intermediate solution which government and private sector can leverage to start implementing and tracking the system? So as we looked at, the packaging producers actually already have the data, and the recyclers already have an input-output analysis as just part of their business. So the EPR scheme is essentially setting up this whole data system and collecting this reported data from the different operators in the system. So basically, a PRO has this role of generating this data and collecting this and putting it all together. So really, we advocate that you just start the system, and ideally, there are some provisions in place where you can also adjust it as more data comes in and you get a better idea of the market condition. And EPR is not just something you set up and you just leave it. It's something that you actually have to continuously adjust, monitor, and continue to advance year by year as it goes forward. We had a question on indicators as well. So which ones are the best ones to assess EPR? There, the point being made was that recycling rates or cost per ton can actually be flawed because the calculations aren't transparent, or you have different situations in different states, so comparability is difficult. So here for us, I think the main objectives and requirements are set in the legislation. Those are the things you want to track. And these are volume brought on the market, volume collected and recycled. And if you put something in there in source segregation and collection, then it would be the number of households served. And any other indicators like the cost or the recycling rate can actually be derived from these. And things like costs are actually possibly also internal if the PRO is developing these on them by themselves between different service providers and just generating the cost for the producers based on the cost of running the system. Fourth question we had was the way that the data flows. Does it flow from, well, in Ghana, the data flows from the industry to the PRO and then to the government, but could it also flow the other direction? Can the data flow from the government side to the PRO? And here, it's important to, I think, know that the state sets the framework conditions, and they are not the ones providing the data. They can provide data to help you identify who are the obliged parties and align this with business registration, tax and customs authority data, but actually normally the data flows the other direction. So the system actors in the EPR system, they have to provide the data to the monitoring authorities. And finally, a good question on digital technologies. So how could digital technology support the success of EPR implementation? Here, digital tools are really necessary because you might have tens of thousands of producers, importers, who are obliged parties in your system. And at a certain point, just the scale of the system becomes so large that you can't do it without digital technologies. So you might need data analytics and automation software to support this. But all of this only makes any impact if you also have the right definitions, subcategories, targets, roles, and responsibilities defined in your system. There are some software tools available that can support PROs in managing all of this administrative functions. And there's some others that are available as well, or you can think about introducing, which are linked to traceability and monitoring. So let's say you have a delivery, you could take a picture of the material entering your facility. And again, once it leaves the facility, take pictures to kind of have a mass flow picture-based verification of these different waste flows. So that's the end of my presentation, and I hope this was useful information for you, and we're very happy now to jump into deeper questions.
Thanks, Daniel. I think this was a very, very interesting presentation and insight into data needs and monitoring. We would come to the question and answer session now. I see there are 4 questions already in the chat. If there are any questions you have directly, please raise your hand. And then I would start with the first question in the chat, which is, I think, rather a comment by our colleague Piotr Baszczak from ASIN. He's saying, in the discussion on data, I would like to dwell on the need of data feedback from end of life towards upstream, so that producers know the shortcomings of their products and packaging at end of life stage and are obliged to improve its performance, not simply pay and forget. And now looking to Daniel and Andreas, are there any reactions to this statement? Thanks.
I think this is a very valid comment, and it points towards, I think, an observed weaknesses of many EPR schemes. This is the initial hope that people taking packaging decisions plan about end-of-life costs and have this feedback looping saying, oh, I might plan my packaging differently so that I reduce downstream costs. This is actually a hope that did not fulfill as wished, and indeed a huge problem. Also, in a lot of producers, ideally they only bring one product onto the market for an EPR scheme and optimize their product. But a lot of producers bring a huge variety, and when they have competing PROs, they negotiate a bulk price. So it's not only one product that influences the price; it's the total bulk, and this information soon gets lost. Eco-modulation might be an answer. It's a very complex topic, so part of this answer is hopefully content of the next webinar. But nevertheless, I fully agree. We basically agree that in the future, we have to think this feedback loop is not lost or even more strengthened. So I think probably an answer, just stay tuned, come to the next webinar.
Thanks, Andreas. All right. Then let's come to the second question, which is asking, can you talk about how differences between projected quantities put on the market and the actual amounts as determined after the year is over are typically resolved by the PRO? Daniel, Andreas?
I'm not sure if you can give a satisfactory answer. I think you have to do both, monitor both. And do a correction at a certain point in time. How this is handled by different PROs, I personally do not know. I think there are various solutions to it, that you have a credit system for the next year or a payback or additional fees. I'm not sure if Cyclers colleagues have more insight how this is handled in detail in specific PROs or EPR systems. Nevertheless, I think it's more of a fine-tuning. how to organize your contract between a PRO and a customer as well. Basically, these are B2B contracts if we speak of PROs that are companies.
Maybe just to quickly come in, Andreas.
Stefan, yes, please come in.
It is definitely a challenge, and we basically see 1 year projections as a bit too far, but for beginning it might be okay, and then with the measures you said, counting as credits, for instance, after 1 year period. Normally we go or recommend a 3-month period of transactions and actual amount checking in order to balance out the figures over the company, and then it might come more or less to that we actually put on.
All right, thanks, Stefan, for these insights. Great, I hope this answers your question. Then I would come to the next question in the chat, which is putting an idea on the table and basically asking PROs in the system are needed to verify and manage data. But what if a digital product passport based on blockchain would come in? Maybe PROs would become redundant. Could the future modern EPR scheme be set up without intermediary PROs?
An interesting thought, I would say. On the other side, I mean, certainly digital systems can reduce the efforts, but we should not forget that most producers, obliged parties, don't want to get involved too much. They want to outsource the responsibility, basically, a one-stop shop solution for their EPR responsibilities. So they don't want to, make contracts with waste operators, and you will still need waste operators. Waste collection will never be 100% digital. And you need a legal entity to sign a contract with waste management operators. So I personally think no. Of course, digital systems can take off a lot of this data flow, but a PRO as a legal entity will continue to be needed, in particular with packaging. If every producer sets up an own collection system for packaging, we will have chaos. So in particular in the packaging field, an EPR system without any PRO as a legal entity is, for me, almost impossible to imagine.
Great. Thanks, Andreas. I hope also this answers your question, Piotr. Then let's move on to the next question. How typical are EPR schemes that require data on the quantity of materials after contamination is removed? For example, after sorting at the material recycling facility.
Very good one. This is in fact touches the question, is what is classified as recycling really recycled? And I would say that in the past, or at least still in many EPR systems, it is accounted for recycling what was given into a recycling company. And in fact, we know that when we give mixed packaging, for example, into a recycling plant, not everything will be recycled. There will be sorting, and a certain part of the stream will certainly not be recycled. There are latest attempts that, the data point is taken exactly after sorting to overcome this problem. But I would still say that a lot of EPR systems do, for simplicity reasons, what was delivered to recycling. I'm not sure if Cyclus colleagues have more insights here. We are aware of a lot of attempts of taking the data point after sorting, as suggested in this comment. Nevertheless, this is probably not only a subject to EPR systems, but also to general monitoring and rules of how is recycled, allocated, and quantified.
Maybe, Andreas, to add, the European Commission is amending their rules on accounting recycling, and this is exactly what you mean, and not the delivery to a recycler, but a certain measurement point in recycling where granules or whatever is produced. So to clearly count on the net of what is being recycled and not what came in. And I think this is also an aspect that be solved in the past by having certain specifications on the input recycling facility. But it's really important to know of what quality material is that is sent to recycling. So is it already 90% dirt content, for instance, or is it less or fewer? This is also a very important figure we need to have in the EPR system in order to clearly allocate the recycling efficiency at the end.
Thanks, Stefan, and thanks, Andreas. Also hope this answers this question. I would like to move on to the next question, which are actually two. So maybe let me start with the first one. What is an appropriate threshold for determining which industries should be obligated to contribute to the EPR scheme?
This is, I think, national decision making. Every country has different types of landscape of producers bringing things onto the market. And I think it's very much also linked to this webinar we had last week. We're saying an EPR system that starts newly should make sure it does not take too much on board, at least in the first phase. So it's important to screen out those parts of the market that matter where you can trace who are your obliged parties, make them obliged into this EPR and enforce it, and probably later extend. And it has to do, of course, with the waste management situation. You want to fill a gap. So we have to know about the gap. What is the gap? What needs to be improved in terms of waste types, in terms of segments? It's very often, virtually always, packaging types that end up at consumers' households or in public spaces. So consumer packaging and service packaging. And here, of course, look at the types that are with current systems not managed properly and where the volumes are and where the improvement potentials are. And it, of course, makes a huge difference if you have a lot of small shops, producers, few big ones, or a lot of interim ones. So this is very much up to a nation to find out and also decide where it should focus.
Thank you, Andreas. The second question is, should declarations for EPR contribution be based on the number of units placed on the market, the weight of the packaging material used, or a combination of both metrics?
If it's for volume, if it's for collection and recycling, clearly tonnage. So it's the weight of the packaging brought onto the market and the weight collected and recycled. If there are other targets, for example, a reuse target in the beverage segment, for example, a certain target that a producer or producers have to meet at least 20% or let it be 50% reusable packaging in a beverage segment, then the weight, of course, is flawed because a reused bottle is always heavier. So there, it's probably the liter of goods provided to the market, beverage in this case. So the liters of beer, water, soft drinks brought onto the market, packed in reusable packaging and in non-reusable single-use packaging. So normally it's weight, but for reuse target, it's volume or content of the product.
Okay, great. And then coming to the next question, PROs and producers often resist transparency. They want to protect proprietary data. Sorry. Is there empirical evidence to support the claim that forcing transparency actually causes problems or damages?
I mean, it depends on the decision you make on the types of PRO you want. If you want competition, competing PROs, a PRO will be a company, a profit-seeking company. And in most jurisdictions, you can't force a company to display the prices they give to one of the customers. If you ask a plumber to come to your house to fix something, you arrange a price. And there might be a price list, but he's not forced to apply the standard price list to you or to your neighbor the same one. So in most jurisdictions, transparency is based on the fact that you might have to do with a private operated company, might just not be transparent. So the company will not be obliged to display the exact fee structure they apply to one company or to another. They might, and this is what a lot of PROs in this situation do, they negotiate price on a lot of factors. You know, how important is a certain customer for me and my business in a country? Can I give a better price because of volume or because, you know, we make a contract for more than 1 year? So transparency has to do with the choice of PRO system a country is choosing. If a country says, oh, we want more transparency, they might opt going for a non-profit PRO structure. There more transparency can be asked. So all the data on financial flows, on fee structure can be made transparent because it's non-profit. On the other side, the competition aspect and then also the economics for the customers might also be lower. So it must be balanced out. You can't have all advantages with every system.
Thanks, Andreas. The next question is a more broader question, but maybe you can also give some thoughts on that. You talked about packaging. What about EPR for electronic products? Maybe we can answer this question against the background of today's session on data needs and monitoring. I'm not sure who wants. Daniel, Andreas, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally it follows the same structure. Of course, you then just have a different product category that you're looking at. And I think with electronics there, you're defining, yeah, basically different types of electronic products that you want to also get a certain amount of recycling rate related to. But yeah, it's a hazardous waste as well. So it's something that you can normally address in a separate EPR system in general. I don't know, Andreas, if you have any additional thoughts.
I think the big difference is that electronic products are durable goods. So it's not the amount brought onto the market this year, but it's calculated against an average volume from the past. In the EU, it's the average of the tonnage of the last 3 years brought onto the market. So to reflect that it's not the collection recycling net, not the base year is this year. So it's just to account for the time delay.
All right, perfect. Then next question. Cost of recycling is often more than selling prices, especially for soft packaging with lamination, coating, and printing. How is this problem solved? Is there any motivation financially?
I mean, an EPR system obliges the obliged parties to take over these costs. So theoretically, you would say the producers are then taking over all costs related to collection, sorting, recycling. So the costs would increase, and in fact, they are increasing. This is the EPR fees the producers, the obliged parties pay. So is it enough? You might say it's enough very often for compliance. Then the quality of recycling can, or what is done with the packaging can of course be still discussed. So is a recycling, put all the plastic together, make it to a block, or put it into infrastructure for pavement slabs, for example. Do we qualify this as recycling? Yes and no. It might be very cheap, but it might not be very high quality recycling. So a regulator can also specify about, you know, the quality of recycling. Is this using plastic, mix it with sand and cement, make pavement slabs out of it? Do we consider this as recycling? Yes or no? Or do we want to turn it into a material of a similar function? So probably not packaging again because it's context sensitive, but for something other high value. And there you can, as a regulator, of course, bring in a quality element, and it is likely to have also price implications. So high quality management might be more expensive. It might also preserve material value, but it might from the process be a bit more expensive. It might have price implications, of course, on EPR. So EPR is not everything. You also have to think about how in a country recycling and the various qualities of recycling are covered and regulated and monitored after all.
All right, thanks, Andreas. Then let's come to the next question, which is a more comprehensive question, but let me still read it out loud. By a participant from Fonsham International Limited from Cameroon. He's asking, in low-income countries like Cameroon with limited technical organization, would you agree that regulator has an enormous role to play in organizing the system? The producers are multinationals with too much influence to waive efforts from PROs like ours. How also can you propose assistance to his company, Fonsham International, get to the regulator, government to be made responsibility for driving this very important effort and process? Not sure if you got the question. Otherwise, I would also ask eBay to come in and clarify this.
I mean, I would be happy if someone would speak up. Otherwise, I'm the only talking the whole rest of the session. So I would be more comfortable if this was be a bit more of a dialogue.
Of course. So I'm not sure if eBay is still in the call. If, please come in. Feel free to raise your question directly to Andreas and Daniel and our colleagues from Cyclos, of course. Otherwise, I would ask Andreas to maybe answer the question as mentioned in the chat.
Okay,
so it does not look like this to Andreas. Yeah.
Shortly refer to the last session where we had exactly this challenge. A lot of countries are challenged with limited resources on the regulatory side. So we basically gave 3 recommendations. The first one was focus. Focus on the packaging waste type that matters most. It might be laminates, composite materials. Secondly, apply a phased approach. Start small, but enforce properly. If you have limited enforcement capacity, don't fall into the trap that the system is getting used to a situation where non-compliance is the norm. Better start focused and enforced focused. And the third one is, if you have limited capacities in enforcement, put enforcement focus on capturing free riders. So those who are already participating in the system might still have here and there a bit of an issue, but in the beginning, it's more important to close the free rider gap. So these are 3 recommendations we would have in situations where you have limited enforcement capacities. Focus on the waste type, phase the approach, and focus on free riders in terms of enforcement, so the regulatory stick.
And I think to add to this is this other point we made at the end is the sanctions need to be in your legislative approach. So from the question that's been asked here, it sounds a bit like you might have some large multinationals that you can't manage to convince to do something. And this responsibility does lie then with your authorities to apply sanctions to those obliged parties who are not joining the system. So if you have sanctions in your legislation, then you need to get your authorities to then threaten and apply these sanctions to those obliged parties who are not shifting their weight. And you can do this by starting with sending them a letter saying, you know, this is what you have to actually oblige to comply with. And this is the sanction that you're going to be hit with if you do not apply this or join the scheme and start actually paying to the PRO. If your authorities are not willing to do that when you ask them, then I'm not sure what other suggestions I could come up with. I don't know if there's any experience from Cyclos on that side.
In case Stefan is speaking, Stefan, could you somehow speak up a little bit, because somehow your voice was very low when you spoke last time.
Sorry, was out for sure. They just can second that. So if the authority is not willing to punish non-participating users to take part, that's the real challenge. It has to be clear that non-participation is a higher fee or fine than participating in the system. So for instance, like I think in South Korea it was just then the double price or even more. You are caught by non-participating. You have to pay them the authority directly or whatever. So this is really important in order to avoid as much free riding as possible.
Thanks, Stefan. Stefan, just checking in with you. your mic seems to be on a different setting, so it's quite hard to follow. Maybe you can check that. Thanks. All right. Hope this answers your question, Ebe. Then I would like to come to the next question, which is basically building a bit the bridge from last meeting to today's meeting. And someone is asking or saying that she's still a bit shaken by the news from Andreas in the last meeting that no EPR scheme has yet managed to minimize waste. What type of data should we require in future EPR reporting system to change that?
I did not want to shake you too much. I would say EPR is needed. And what can probably be added that, for example, reuse targets are possible and they can minimize waste. So probably I have to correct myself from last week. For example, as said before, targets for reusable items in certain segments, the beverage segments. Of course, you can think about saying, producer bringing beverage onto my national market have to demonstrate by the volume they say sell at least 30%, 50 or 70% are bottled in reusable items and define what is reusable. So it must be designed for reuse. There must be a logistical system that takes it back, plus a financial incentive, such as a deposit refund scheme. This is possible, and this has been done. It's a bit more challenging in segments where we don't have reusable systems yet. There might be there in the future, but it's hard to regulate something or to demand something which is not yet existing. And it's also hard for regulators to demand a total reduction of packaging. We might put some brain into this, but the difficulty is that in certain segments, packaging will always be needed. So reduction targets can be seen as something you force to reduce my economic activity in general. It might not be true in every case, but it's hard for a regulator to put reduction targets apart from reuse targets, for example. So this is where EPR has, I would say, its limits.
Great, thanks, Andreas. All right, then let's come to the next question. Someone is asking, how does the system ensure the inclusion of the informal sector? I believe the system should track how it is also involving waste workers and waste pickers. Maybe a central database of the informal beneficiaries. Goes a bit away from our initial focus, but maybe there are some thoughts you would like to share on this, Andreas and Daniel. And maybe before we come to that, I would also like to mention that as Prevent, we have a working group on social inclusion. If you have any further question on the inclusion of informal sector workers in an EPR system, you can also reach out to my colleague Maren Jäger and join the Prevent Social Inclusion Working Group. I will post her email address in the chat now. And then over to you, Andreas.
Exactly. There are experts, a lot of people who really think about exactly this. In last webinar, we had 2 model cases which illustrate what is possible. EPR systems that focus on a pure volume approach, so that producers have to collect and recycle certain percentage of what they bring onto the market and only have this as a core indicator. In a lot of countries where there are informal sectors, very often the market reaction is very simple. There are recyclers, waste management operator who put out an incentive and say, everybody who brings me a certain volume and a certain quality will get some money. And this stimulates the informal sector. It's probably not the time of integration we would like to have. It does not systematically change working conditions. And we also have other EPR systems who also indicate how collection should be done, segregation at source. And there, of course, you need people on the ground organizing this. Very often informal people, informal structures have this network. They could be integrated, but of course they will have to formalize at a certain point because you need to sign a contract with them. So this also opens an opportunity to integrate them in a formalized manner with a lot of improvements, better working conditions, better economic situation. But it's not a rule of nature that this will happen automatically. It depends also on local politics, whether such associations, informal networks are deliberately roped into such systems. But as said, there are a lot of experts, a lot of practitioners who exactly think about this challenge, quite relevant challenge in a lot of countries.
Thanks, Andreas. Alrighty, then coming to the next question, which is, which data being key to quantifying a PRO performance? How can we reliably track online-based volumes versus how much of the waste recycled is attributed to online sales? Maybe you can react to that. I do not completely see a question, but yeah, handing over to you, Andreas and Daniel. Otherwise, we can also ask the author of this comment to come in and explain it in further detail. Thanks.
Yes, I'm not sure if I got the whole meaning of it. Of course, how can a PRO effectiveness be gauged? It's of course, do they fulfill the obligations on behalf of the customers? Yes or no? So if there is an 80% recycling and collection target, did they achieve on behalf of the customers 80% yes or no? We can probably measure overperformance. So is it probably 90%? This would be a very good idea because we realize that EPR is very good in achieving target, but not very good in overachieving targets, because overachieving means money, and the customers, they want compliance, but probably not overcompliance if it's more expensive. So we might think about, is there a certain monetary benefit for overperformance? I think this would be a new element in most EPR system. Then, of course, there is paper, the digital trail, and reality. And there are, of course, a lot of cases of fraud where what was reported does not fully match all realities on the ground. This is, of course, very difficult to gauge, and it's very difficult to find out where the fraud happens and where misreporting might occur. So there, I think plausibility checks are certainly needed. Are claims of collection, for example, in a certain municipality plausible? So there is normally the packaging waste generated per household or per capita available in a country. And if you collect in a small community a huge volume of packaging waste, of course, a question mark should raise. So you have to inbuild into monitoring and compliance from the authority side such basic verification steps. And if there are certain doubts, look deeper. On the online sale versus non-online, I'm not sure if this is possible. A lot of products are sold in both channels, but it probably relates to enforcement and what we had before. It's wise to think about a mechanism where big online trading platforms are required to check that all of their corporates using the online platform for marketing are registered and compliant with EPR regulations. This can be very effective because you basically oblige online platforms to check their sellers if they are in your national EPR system, yes or no. So this can be a very effective means of free rider capturing.
So
Great.
maybe to add, it's better to hear
Stefan,
now.
please.
This is better. Yeah,
Yes, we
perfect.
can hear you now. Yeah, let's try
Okay.
it.
Yeah, just to second what Andreas said. So this is exactly what Germany, for instance, did in the last recent years for when it comes to packaging waste and also waste electronics. So we are not allowed to go over the big online trading platforms without, as a seller, provide your registration number to the Amazons and so on, in order to show that you are complying with the system, that you are known in the system, and allowed to bring products onto the market and its relating packaging. So, and this really had the result that the number of producers over online marketing really explode in the last recent months, especially due to the fact that in Germany there's no certain threshold, so there's no exemption on participating for no one when it comes to packaging.
Great. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Andreas, for this answer. Coming to the next question, do EPR schemes typically set post-consumer recycled content targets for packaging? And if yes, what data is required and how effective has this approach been?
To my knowledge, no. Nevertheless, a lot of EPR systems require legal basis, and these are normally not purely EPR laws, but these are sector-specific law. In Germany, you have the Verpacki, the packaging law. And in the packaging law, if you do a national law anyway, you can, of course, for certain segments, require a recycled content target. As in Europe, we now have a 25% recycled content target for PET bottles. So the EPR system itself, probably not. But when you think about regulating a sector such as packaging, you need a regulating law anyway. And this is, of course, a time to think about, certain mandatory minimum requirements for the recycled content. Recycled content requirements are also for EPR systems hard to verify because you can't measure it on a product. You need to rely on certain certifications, on certain proof of evidence that can't be measured, such as this is polymer, this is either PET or HDPE. So this is probably my answer, but I've seen Stefan switching on his camera, so I assume he has something to say.
Yes, sorry. Oh, Agnes, I see Agnes. Agnes maybe wants to second that. So just to clarify, so the requirement to have recycled content does not come out of our EPR system. It comes from a EU regulation that is feeding this. So, and only applies, as you said, for PET bottles due to the fact that we have always the issue of when using recycled content with food grade material or non-food grade material and so on. And the only food grade materials coming from recycling currently is for the PET sector. So this is also a strong limitation when we think about this. Maybe that was just my answer to that. Agnes, do you want to say anything else?
Yes, Agnes Spinnmann is my name. Let me add it in the field of the EPR schemes. Very often there are eco-modulated fees. And if the producer and the obliged companies can say, okay, my packaging has 50%, for example, recycled content, then in some countries, like in France or Netherlands, there are rules that they pay less for the EPR fee. But as Andreas already mentioned, they need for every packaging where these eco-modulate fees shall be reused because there is an recycled content, they have recycled material inside. They really need for every item for every segment an audit and to verify that there is really recycled content inside of these packaging. If it is not glass or metals, there are normally all the time inside, but for plastics. Yeah. Hope you could understand this aspect of modulate fees with recycled content. This is typically, and this is in the new European legislation also, it will be mandatory to have this modulation in future.
Okay, thanks, Agnes, and thanks also Stefan and Andreas for your insights on that. Let's move on. I mean, we have a couple of chat conversation in our chat. I mean, there was a report shared. I think that's worth also having a look. And then the next point is, I think, more a clarification from Reed about the former comment. Reed, you're also able to come in and clarify this verbally, otherwise I can read it out loud.
Yes, yeah. What I was trying to find out was whether there is actually empirical information that supports this notion that commercial data must be protected. It's a kind of a standard claim that, oh, we can't share this data because, you know, it would put us at a disadvantage. And what I'm wondering is, if every business is in the same situation, then presumably, at least at first pass, they face the same obligation, and thus they are not disadvantaged compared to their peers. I never come across any actual studies that show that economic development or business performance has been hurt by this level of transparency. So it's kind of an ideological claim. We can't show this, but I'm just wondering what the empirical reality is of pushing further for better data. Or does no one want to take on
Thanks,
a topic
Reed.
like
I
this?
mean, yeah, I'm also looking at Andreas and Daniel. So
I mean, my reaction would be, I'm not a lawyer. So I'm right. I heard what you said, that is there an evidence that transparency harms? I would say there are always companies who are very transparent, who have something like a first mover advantage of being very transparent. We see this in the packaging segment. We all have our pioneers who do positive advertisement, are very transparent and also on where they still fail. And we need them to develop things further. On the other side, I have a feeling that if this model is copied by everybody, not everybody has the same benefit anymore. And the claim you're referring to is very often backed up by a legal situation where I, as a non-lawyer, don't have the perfect overview. So I fear this might need a country-specific legal analysis. What type of data can be asked for to be given to an authority, to a PRO, and to the public? And the answer might be different in every nation. So it's something where I'm sorry, I can't help you any further.
Right. I
but
agree
you're right.
that I'm not asking the legal question here, and I agree that it depends on the country's legal structure. I'm asking the more general question was, should we take these claims that this is important in economic terms at face value, or should we say, you know, is this really a burden on businesses? I understand that there's a tremendous legal complexity here.
thanks. I also have seen that Stefan has switched on his camera, so maybe Stefan, you can answer that. Thanks.
Yeah. I think Leah's just highlighted it's very important that we have the understanding of different levels of information within a EPR scheme. We have public information, we have system informations, and we have also a couple of confidential information, which might only reach a kind of third party by checking and validating it. For instance, if we go and have to check in the amount of packaging put onto the market, or we have to check the mass flows. At the end of the day, when it comes to recycling, we really have to dive into confidential data, and it's only analyzed for this purpose with our expert view, you know. So this data stays there without being published or something, but the outcomes of analyzing this data, this is then a information for the system, so-called system data. And the aggregation of all system data somehow then also should be published and made public in order to see the EPR system's performance at the end of the day. So this is very important. I agree, as Andrea said, every country deals different with this. So where's the certain layer to be taken? But this is important to understand. So we have a lot of data, but different quality of it.
Thanks, Stefan. All right, then let's move to the next question. Again, a more general question, but still maybe you can give a short reaction on this. Andreas and Daniel, is there an EPR for agricultural plastic waste?
I've seen a discussion in the chat. I think there's already an answer given, right? That there is an EPR system on plastic waste somewhere in the world. It's not in the typical focus, I would say. Typical focus on EPR is very much when it comes to these type of materials on packaging. In an ideal world, it would be in a B2B system where a farmer basically for waste material is directly working with a waste disposal service. We know that it's not the case in a lot of places in the world. So I'm not an expert here. Food for thought in countries where this is an issue, of course. As said in the last call, the last webinar, it's also possible to open the scope to selected types that can be easily differentiated from other waste types, where the players bring it onto the market are known, and where it's a particularly high burden to the society and the environment. So we mentioned cigarette butts and fishing nets last time, but in certain countries, it might also be agricultural foils.
Thanks, Andreas. And yeah, as you mentioned in the chat, there are more links on this topic, so please have a look here. All right, next question. How do you identify free riders? Who identifies them? Through text data or something else?
Stefan or Agnes?
Yes, if you want, I can give my first answer. First of all, it is very, very important that there is a central register where all large companies have to be registered and give their data. And then you can see, okay, are all registered or not? How can you see it? Okay, if this register will be published, then the competitors can see, okay, my other competitor is not yet registered, and it can help to find out that everybody has be registered in a register. But this does not yet not really help that they reported the right data. Maybe they bring 10,000 tons of packaging on the market, but they report and pay only for 5,000. Then tax data can help, and it is really very, very important that these central register, it can be it must be an independent central register if there are more than one PROs in one country. If there is only one PRO or it is government led, then this register can be part of these PRO. And then the tax data can help, or other experience about and knowledge about these companies. And also, if there are very big companies, it can help to make audits in the country and to say the penalties are very, very high if you will not register or give wrong data to the register. These are the experience, I think. Maybe Stefan, if you want to add, I don't know.
Yeah, so yeah, but yeah, to complete maybe it's a combination of multiple aspects. So it's this public register where everyone can see whether a producer is registered or not. It is kind of artificial intelligence that is also collecting and analyzing data compared maybe with text data. Whatever you have and what's beneficial is good for it. At least you can go into stores and search for the products in order to compare it with the brands or producers mentioned in the register or not, and ask for them. It is probably easier to identify whether one is registered or not. Then the second aspect, as Agnes said, does he declare the right amounts with his registry? But to have a sound register is so important, because with this you will have identified the responsible companies and persons behind this, and then you have the first anchor point to come to them in order if something is not compliant for the further system. So this is so crucial to have a really sound and register. Also explaining for what type of packaging, for instance, it's registered and so on, to make it as obvious as possible public data.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Agnes. Okay, then looking also a bit at the time, we have 10 minutes left, so let's move quickly to the next question. Also quite a long question. We seem to account for EPR only the cost of collected plastics. What about littered plastics or that found in sewage sludge with its cost, or at least the plastics that is still in the residual bin? Maybe these data should also feed to the EPR price calculations. PROs could be interested as this would increase money flows. Who of you would like to take it? You both unmuted, Stefan, Andreas.
I can do the first one.
Perfect.
Completely right. So, but really depends on who's taking that cat, so to say. In some countries, the content of it's not only plastic. Maybe most of the time it's packaging. And content of packaging and residual waste is not an aspect for the EPR system. In other countries, it is, and they might have to pay for it. So this is really a decision that has to be taken at the regulatory level, how to deal with this. Nevertheless, it is important to have these figures in order to see, okay, what is going in the right direction, what is still in residual waste as a potential, and so on. The same is for littering. If one task or obligation for the PRO or for the producer is to reduce littering by cleanups or whatever, if this comes into the regulatory frame, it has to be taken over by the PRO as one task, and then it has to be paid for. So that's how things go. So just to highlight, it is so crucial to have the right or a good understanding about the aims you want to achieve with an EPR regulation. It could be just cleaning up, but it should be more, but it could be both, but it really depends on how the regulation is.
Okay, thanks, Stefan. Then the next question, is there data on the effectiveness of the French or German approaches to dealing with EPR and online sales? Again, who would like to take this question? Andreas, Stefan?
I would play it to Agnes or Stefan, because I've seen very recently a very interesting slide from their side where I took the information that from the point on, Online was obliged to check on the registration of their traders. The registration numbers jumped up tremendously. So the free rider problem was significantly reduced. But quantitative data for Germany, probably Stefan and Agnes can give more details.
All right, then, Stefan, Agnes, floor is yours.
That's the same problem as Agnes mentioned before. So we see the producers now registered, but we are not quite sure, honestly, if they come in with the right amounts. Probably not in all the cases, or surely not in all the cases. And this is, so to say, the next step to be taken to clarify on the amounts and to see whether this is right or not. I can say from my experience as an auditor in the waste electronics as well, I've been asked by the system there sometimes to check data. This is then done by jumping into their trading figures and marketing figures that is also collected via the big trading platforms. So you can then have an assessment what more or less the amount is that comes over them. Probably not too much, but to really be assured, you have to at least go there and check it on site, what is not possible at all. But just to note, for your notice, the system will see if there is a discrepancy somehow in the data one is reporting from month to month or from quarter to quarter, and they will ask you why is there a big change, or why don't you tell any numbers anymore, or whatever, and then you will be asked, and then somehow a third party comes in to have an expert opinion.
Yeah.
But as said before, It is not as much in the amount, but this is mainly due to the fact that the big brands or producers have already been in. We basically know that 70 to 80% of especially packaging waste accounts for the top 20 brand owners or producers within the country. So it's also for Germany. So this is most of the time with minor amounts.
All right, thanks, Stefan. I would say time allows for one last question for today. And this is, what is the relationship of plastic credits and EPR schemes in terms of targets and compliance? Who of you would like to take this question of our experts? Again, looking at Agnes, Stefan, Andreas.
Yeah. So
Stefan.
I would take over this, but it's not as easy to be answered. So maybe, definitely this could be also a part for the next session as well when it comes to costs and so on. So plastic credits are good to have as long as you do not have anything else. An EPR system is a bit different. It is to finance the complete estate with the packaging, collection, sorting, and disposal, and so on. So this is financing the complete system. Having credits at the end of the day, and I see it now as a cash for trash. Yeah, it is. It will make the tasks so expensive because you always have to think about not every plastic, because it's mainly about plastic, is of value. But you have to give it a price in order to bring the people or informals or other actors and stakeholders to that point to provide you that material. So you will always have to buy it, to buy, and this leads to a really high financial demand you have then at that point, if you think about this as a entire system for your own complete country. So this is why it is so different from the EPR system that is giving the waste more or less the price with putting it onto the market and financing then the complete system behind. So it's a different approach. It's not parallel, and it's honestly even not as easy to combine it with. For both, you have to have a real transparent system. This depends to both. Especially for EPR systems, you have to show more or less everything when waste comes from A to B and what is done with it. And the same applies for the plastic credits as well, because you have to ensure that something good happens with the material that you collected and bought. So maybe this as a more overarching aspect, and I'm sure Agnes will come to this as a certain aspect in the question and answer round for the next session as well.
Yeah, let me add it. Plastic credits can have impact in one recycling center or something like this, but never you can never build up with plastic credits a nationwide collection system, and never build up a system where a recycling system only in small scales it is possible. And I want to give you information that there in the EPR toolbox we added a paper, I think half a year ago, where there is compared EPR system, the approach of EPR, and plastic credits, the approach of EPR, and cash for trash, and with tax. And there you can find a lot of more information, how it can affect each other, how it can work together, and what are the differences between these approaches.
Thank you, Agnes, and thank you, Stefan. And I think talking about costs, fees, and eco-modulation, plastic credits already gives a wonderful bridge to next week's meeting. Please join our meeting on Wednesday about cost, fees, and eco-modulation, the third session in the series. And with this, I would like to thank all of you for your participation. I would also like to thank Daniel and Andreas for this perfect and excellent presentation and insights. And of course, to Stefan and Agnes for your very detailed insights and feedback. Thanks a lot. Have a wonderful day and see you next week.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.